Before anyone knew the full story, before the medals were pinned and the speeches were given, before the single night that would rewrite what it meant to be a soldier in the modern age, there was a cabin in Wyoming and a grandfather who decided it was finally time to tell the truth. Not the sanitized version, not the one fit for official reports or evening news segments. The real one. The one that still woke him at 3 in the morning with his heart hammering and his hands reaching for a rifle that now sat locked in a glass case on the wall. The one about his daughter and the night they saved each other. Wyoming cabin, December 24. Snow fell in thick curtains outside the window, muffling the world into a hushed stillness that felt like being wrapped in cotton. Inside the cabin, a fire crackled and popped in the stone hearth, throwing dancing shadows across walls lined with photographs spanning 6 decades. Military portraits in dress uniforms, faded Polaroids of soldiers with arms slung around each other's shoulders, young faces that would never grow old, and newer pictures. A woman in Army Ranger's uniform, sharp and proud, her eyes carrying the same intensity as the old man who sat now in a wheelchair before the fire. Jack Hayes had seen 65 summers. His hair had gone silver, his hands showed the tremor of early-stage Parkinson's, and his legs no longer worked the way they once had. But his eyes were still the eyes of a hunter, sharp, calculating, missing nothing. Across from him sat his grandson, 12-year-old Tommy, who had been begging for months to hear the real story of what happened at Fort Glacier. The boy had heard rumors at school. His friends had shown him YouTube videos with titles like "Female Sniper Saves Entire Battalion" and "The Shot That Defied Physics." But Tommy wanted the truth, and Jack had finally decided the boy was old enough to handle it. Jack watched his grandson for a long moment, the firelight reflecting in the boy's eager eyes. Then he reached down beside his wheelchair and lifted something heavy onto his lap. An old rifle, M40A1, Vietnam era. The woodstock was scarred and weathered, the metal showed its age, but the weapon was immaculately maintained, museum quality. Tommy's eyes widened. "Your Aunt Morgan carried this rifle," Jack said quietly. His voice was rough, like gravel rolling in a tin can. "But before I tell you about her, I need to tell you about me, because you can't understand what she became without understanding where she came from." The boy leaned forward. "Grandpa," he said, "were you really a sniper in Vietnam?" Jack's expression tightened. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with 54 years of memories that had never quite faded. Slowly he nodded. "I was," he said, 3rd Marine Division, 1968 to 1970. I was 20 years old when they handed me this rifle and told me to kill people I'd never met for reasons I didn't fully understand." He paused, his fingers running along the stock of the rifle with the unconscious familiarity of a musician touching an old instrument. "They called me Phantom," Jack continued, "because I'd disappear into the jungle for days at a time. No radio, no backup. Just me, this rifle, and targets marked on maps by people who'd never stepped foot in the bush." Tommy swallowed. "How many?" Jack looked at him steadily. 87 confirmed kills, he said, each word landing like a stone dropped into still water. "But that's just the ones they counted, the ones where someone could verify the body afterward." The boy's expression shifted. Not quite horror, not quite awe, something in between. "Were they all bad guys?" Jack's eyes darkened. "That's the thing about war, son. You don't get to ask that question until after you've already pulled the trigger. And by then it's too late to take it back." He shifted in his wheelchair, the leather creaking. "Let me tell you about one particular day," Jack said. "February 1969, a place called Khe Sanh. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the cabin like something trying to get in. Khe Sanh, Vietnam, February 1969. The jungle was never silent. That's what civilians didn't understand. They thought jungle meant birds chirping and monkeys howling and the constant buzz of insects. And all of that was true during the day. But at night, when men were hunting other men, the jungle held its breath. It watched. It waited. And that silence was when you knew death was close. Jack Hayes was 20 years old, lying prone in the mud on a ridgeline, overlooking a valley choked with elephant grass and shattered trees. His M40 rifle was pressed against his shoulder, his eye fixed to the scope, his breathing slow and controlled. Beside him, his spotter Rodriguez whispered numbers: wind speed, range, temperature, all the variables that meant the difference between a clean kill and a wasted round. Below them in the valley, 12 Marines were pinned down, Jack could see them through his scope, young faces streaked with mud and blood, terror in their eyes. They'd walked into an ambush, classic L-shaped formation. And now they were caught in a kill zone with nowhere to go. The enemy was good, disciplined. They weren't firing wildly like militia. These were NVA regulars, and they had a sniper of their own. Rodriguez pressed the radio to his ear, then looked at Jack. "Command says pull back," he whispered. "Too hot. They're calling in air support." Jack didn't move. "Air support is 30 minutes out," he said quietly. "Those boys don't have 30 minutes. Rodriguez knew better than argue. He adjusted his spotting scope. Enemy sniper is in the tree line. 11 o'clock. Range 800 yards. Wind 3 knots from the east. Jack found him. A shadow in the branches. Just a silhouette. But Jack had learned to see what others missed. The angle of a branch that hung wrong. The pattern of leaves that didn't quite match. The absence of birds where they should have been. He exhaled slowly. Let his heartbeat settle. Felt the earth beneath him, in the wind against his cheek, in the weight of the rifle like an extension of his own body. The world narrowed to a single point. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder. And 800 yards away, the shadow in the trees fell. The enemy fire slackened. The Marines below began to move, dragging their wounded toward cover. Rodriguez was already calling in their position to extract them. But Jack was still looking through his scope, and what he saw froze the blood in his veins. The body had fallen from the tree, and it wasn't a hardened soldier. It was a boy, maybe 16, maybe 17, too young to shave, too young to die. Jack lowered the weapon slowly. "Good shot," Rodriguez said. "You saved them." Jack didn't answer. He was staring at that small broken body in the grass, and something inside him cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a hairline fracture in the foundation of who he thought he was. He had killed before. This was his 43rd confirmed kill, but this was the first time he had seen the face afterward. The first time it had been so young. And the worst part was knowing he would do it again, because that boy had been aiming at Americans. That boy would have killed all 12 of those Marines if Jack hadn't pulled the trigger first. That was the equation. That was the math. But knowing you were right didn't make it feel any less like murder. Rodriguez touched his shoulder. "We gotta move," he said gently. "They'll have our position zeroed." Jack Bondon. He rose from the mud, slinging his rifle across his back. They melted into the jungle, 2 shapes fading into green shadows. But Jack carried that boy's face with him. 43rd kill became the one he saw most clearly in the dark. And he would see it for the next 54 years. Post-war, 1971 to 1995. Jack came home in 1971. He was 22 years old. He had 87 confirmed kills, 3 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and nightmares that made sleep feel like drowning. He didn't talk about the war, not to his parents, not to his friends, not to anyone. What was there to say? That he'd become very good at killing? That he could read wind like a language and calculate bullet drop in his head faster than most people could add 2 plus 2? That he'd left pieces of himself in the mud of Southeast Asia and didn't know how to get them back? The VA offered counseling. Jack went once. Sat in a circle with other veterans who cried and raged and tried to make sense of the senseless. He never went back. Talking didn't help. Talking just made it real again. For 6 years, he drifted. Construction work, security jobs, anything that kept him moving and didn't require him to think too hard. He didn't drink, didn't do drugs, just existed in a gray space between the war and whatever came next. Then in 1977, he walked into the VA hospital for a routine checkup and met Linda Chen. She was a counselor, second-generation Chinese-American, calm and steady and patient in ways Jack had forgotten people could be. She asked him questions he didn't want to answer. And when he refused to talk, she didn't push. She just kept showing up. Linda saw through him, past the walls and the silence and the carefully maintained control. She saw the 22-year-old boy who'd come home carrying memories he couldn't share. And somehow, slowly, she taught him that the past didn't have to define the present. They married in 1985. And for the first time since Vietnam, Jack felt like he might actually be allowed to be happy. Their daughter Morgan was born in 1995. And when Jack held her for the first time, tiny and red-faced and squalling, he made himself a promise. "I will never teach her to kill." He meant it. He packed away his rifles, locked them in the basement, refused to talk about the war when Morgan asked. Linda understood. She never pushed him. She knew some doors were meant to stay closed. But then 2010 happened. Cancer. Fast and vicious and merciless. Linda fought for 18 months. Jack held her hand through chemo and radiation and all the ways modern medicine tried and failed to save her. She died on a Tuesday morning in September. Morgan was 15, and Jack, who had survived ambushes and firefights and 2 years in hell, broke. Teaching Morgan, 2010 to 2013. The first time Jack took Morgan shooting, she was 15 and he was 53, and they were both drowning in grief, too big for words. They drove 2 hours into the backcountry without speaking. Parked at an old quarry Jack remembered from before the war. Set up tin cans on a fence post while the wind whispered through dead grass. Jack handed her an old hunting rifle, not the M40. He couldn't bring himself to give her that, but a .308 bolt action. Simple, reliable. Your mother wanted you to know how to protect yourself, he said. His voice was rough. These were the first real words he'd spoken in days. Morgan took the rifle, awkward, uncertain. She'd never held a gun before. Jack showed her how to stand, how to breathe, how to let the world fall away until there was only the target and the trigger in the space between heartbeats. She fired, missed by 3 feet. Again, Jack said. She fired, missed by 2 feet. Again. On the 7th shot, she hit the can. It rang like a tiny bell. Morgan's eyes went wide, and for the first time since her mother died, Jack saw something other than grief on her face. Focus, control, the ability to affect the world in a measurable way. Good, Jack said quietly. They went back the next weekend, and the next, and the next. Jack didn't talk about Vietnam, didn't tell war stories, but he taught her everything Linda had taught him about controlling the things you could control when everything else was chaos. He taught her patience, discipline, the geometry of distance and wind and gravity. And Morgan, grieving and lost and desperate for something to hold on to, learned. By the time she was 16, she could outshoot men twice her age. By 17, she was calculating windage and elevation in her head faster than Jack could. And that scared him, because she wasn't just good. She was gifted, the same way Jack had been gifted. The same instincts, the same uncanny ability to read environments and make impossible shots. He was creating a weapon, just like the Marines had created him, and he didn't know how to stop. When Morgan turned 18 in 2013, she told him she was enlisting. Army, infantry track with hopes for Ranger School. Jack said nothing. He signed the paperwork, attended her graduation from basic, stood in the back and watched her receive her uniform. And then he disappeared from her life. Not dramatically, just slowly. Fewer calls, fewer visits, until Morgan stopped trying to reach him and Jack convinced himself it was for the best. Because he knew what war did to people. He knew what it had done to him, and he couldn't bear to watch it happen to her. But distance didn't protect her. It just meant he wasn't there when she needed him. And that failure would haunt him almost as much as the boy in the tree at Kisan. Fort Glacier, Montana, September 2023. The phone rang at 6 in the morning. Jack was already awake. He was always awake at 6. Old habits from the Corps. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the phone. Early stage Parkinson's. The doctor said it would get worse. He didn't recognize the number. "This is Hayes," he said. The voice on the other end was one he hadn't heard in 15 years. Colonel Samuel Briggs. They'd served together in Desert Storm. Briggs had been a young lieutenant then, green but competent. Now he was a full-bird colonel commanding a battalion in Montana. "Jack," Briggs said, "I need you." Jack's expression tightened. "I'm retired, Sam." "I know." Briggs paused. "But we have a situation, a bad one. Militia activity along the Canadian border. Cartel-funded, military-grade weapons. We've lost 3 operations in the last 6 months. 22 casualties." Jack said nothing. "I need someone who remembers how to fight before we had drones and satellites," Briggs continued. "Someone who can read terrain and predict enemy movement by instinct. Someone who hunted men in the jungle." Jack closed his eyes. "You're looking for something I'm not anymore, Sam. I'm in a wheelchair. I can barely hold a coffee cup steady." "I know." But Briggs' voice softened. "Jack, your daughter is stationed here." The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" "Captain Morgan Hayes transferred to Fort Glacier 3 months ago. She's one of my company commanders." Jack's hand tightened on the phone. "She doesn't want to see me." "She doesn't know I'm calling you," Briggs admitted. "But Jack, if you don't come, she might not get the chance to decide whether she wants to see you or not. We're outnumbered and outgunned, and we're losing soldiers every week. I need help. She needs help, even if she doesn't know it yet. The line went quiet except for the sound of Jack's breathing. When? He finally asked. Briggs exhaled in relief. How soon can you get here? Arrival at Fort Glacier. Jack flew into Billings and drove 3 hours north into the Rockies. The landscape was nothing like Vietnam. High-altitude pine forests and granite peaks dusted with early snow. The air was thin and cold and smelled like coming winter. Fort Glacier wasn't much to look at. A collection of buildings clustered in a valley with mountains rising on 3 sides like the walls of a bowl. Strategic position, good sight lines, but isolated. If something went wrong here, help was hours away. Briggs met him at the gate. The colonel was 58 now, gray at the temples, but still carrying himself like a soldier. They shook hands. Good to see you, Jack. Jack nodded. Wish it was under better circumstances. They drove through the base in silence. Jack observed everything. Guard positions, patrol patterns, the way soldiers move between buildings. He could read a base the way other people read books. This place is a target, Jack said quietly. Briggs glanced at him. What makes you say that? Too isolated. Too predictable. You're running patrols on a schedule instead of randomizing. Your sentries are posted in the same positions every night. If I was planning to hit this base, I'd watch for 3 days and know everything I needed. Briggs' expression hardened. That's why you're here. They parked outside the command building. Briggs handed Jack a visitor badge. There's a briefing at 1400 hours, Briggs said. All company commanders. I'll introduce you then. Jack looked at him. She's going to be there. Briggs nodded. Yes. Does she know I'm coming? No. Jack exhaled slowly. His hands trembled slightly. He shoved them in his pockets. This is a mistake, Sam. Maybe. Briggs met his eyes, but it's the only chance we have. Briefing room, 1400 hours. The briefing room was filled with officers when Jack entered. Captains and lieutenants, most of them young enough to be his children. They glanced at the old man in the wheelchair with curiosity and a hint of pity. Jack ignored them. His eyes swept the room until they found her. Morgan. She was standing near the front, talking quietly with another officer. 28 years old now, lean and hard and carrying herself with the coiled readiness of a predator. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her uniform was immaculate. And when she turned her head and saw him, her entire body went rigid. Their eyes met across the room. For 5 seconds, neither of them moved. The air between them felt electric, charged with 10 years of silence and anger and unfinished conversations. Then Morgan turned away, deliberately. Jack felt something twist in his chest. Briggs stepped to the front of the room. Attention, he said. The room snapped to silence. Officers found seats. I'd like to introduce a special tactical advisor, Briggs continued. Former Gunnery Sergeant Jack Hayes, 3rd Marine Division, Vietnam. 87 confirmed kills. Expert in unconventional warfare and counterinsurgency tactics. He's here to help us figure out why we keep losing operations. The room stirred. A few officers exchanged glances. One younger lieutenant raised his hand. Sir, with respect, what can a Vietnam veteran teach us about fighting modern militia? Technology has changed. Tactics have changed. Briggs looked at Jack. Sergeant Hayes, you want to field that question? Jack rolled forward. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority that didn't need volume. Technology changes, he said. Tactics change. But terrain doesn't change. Wind doesn't change. Fear doesn't change. And men trying to kill each other doesn't change. Your drones and satellites are useful until the enemy jams your signals or takes out your infrastructure. Then what? The lieutenant had no answer. I'm not here to replace your technology, Jack continued. I'm here to teach you what to do when it fails, because it will fail. And when it does, the side that can adapt wins. The side that can't dies. Silence. Briggs nodded. Sergeant Hayes will be observing operations and providing recommendations. You will extend him full cooperation. Dismissed. The room began to empty. Jack watched Morgan rise from her seat. She moved toward the door without looking at him. Captain Hayes, Briggs called. A word. Morgan stopped. Her shoulders tensed. Slowly she turned. Sir, Briggs gestured to Jack. I believe you know Sergeant Hayes. Morgan's eyes were cold. We've met. Jack said nothing. Briggs looked between them. The temperature in the room had dropped 20 degrees. I'll leave you two to catch up, he said carefully. Then he was gone. Father and daughter stood facing each other across 10 feet of empty space that might as well have been 10 miles. You have no right to be here, Morgan said quietly. Her voice was controlled, but there was a razor edge beneath it. I was invited. You should have said no. Probably. Morgan's hands clenched at her sides. 10 years, she said. 10 years of nothing. No calls, no letters, nothing. And now you show up at my duty station? Jack met her eyes. I didn't know you were here until yesterday. Would it have mattered? The question hung in the air. Yes, Jack said quietly. It would have. Morgan laughed. It was not a happy sound. You walked away, she said. You taught me everything about being a soldier, and then you disappeared when I actually became one. Why? Jack's expression flickered. Old wounds carefully buried, threatening to surface. Because I saw what this life did to me, he said, and I couldn't watch it do the same to you. So you just decided I wasn't worth staying for? That's not fair. Fair? Morgan's voice rose slightly. You don't get to talk to me about fair. You don't get to show up after 10 years and pretend you know me, or what I've been through, or what I need. Jack rolled closer. You're right. I don't know you anymore. But I know war, and I know this base is in trouble. And whether you like it or not, I'm here to help keep you and everyone else alive. Morgan stared at him. Something flickered in her eyes, not forgiveness, not even acceptance, just acknowledgement. Stay out of my way, she said. Then she turned and walked out. Jack sat alone in the empty briefing room and wondered if coming here had been the biggest mistake of his life, or if walking away 10 years ago had been. Observation and conflict. Next 3 days. Jack spent the next 3 days watching. He observed patrol routes from his wheelchair positioned on the perimeter, timed response drills, studied the way officers communicated with enlisted, read after action reports from failed operations. And he saw the problems immediately. This battalion was good, professional, well-trained, but they fought like it was 23, technology-dependent, by the book, predictable. The enemy they were facing didn't fight by books. On the third day, Jack requested a meeting with Briggs and his senior staff. Morgan was there, standing at the back of the room with her arms crossed. Jack moved to the front. Your operations are failing, he said bluntly, because you're fighting the wrong war. You're treating this like a counterinsurgency in Iraq or Afghanistan. It's not. Your enemy isn't militia. They're organized, disciplined, funded. They have someone leading them who knows how you think. One of the captains, an older man named Reeves, frowned. How do you know that? Because I've read your patrol reports, Jack said. Every ambush in the last 6 months has been perfectly positioned. They know your routes, they know your timing, they know how you'll respond. That's not luck. That's intelligence. Briggs leaned forward. You think we have a leak? Maybe. Or maybe you're just predictable. Either way, you need to change how you operate. How? Morgan's voice, cold but curious. Jack looked at her. Randomize everything. Patrol routes, timing, formations. Stop broadcasting your movements. Stop relying on technology they can jam or intercept. Start fighting dirty. This isn't Vietnam, Reeves said. We have rules of engagement. Jack's eyes hardened. Rules of engagement are written by people who don't have to follow them into firefights. You want to save your soldiers? Stop fighting clean and start fighting smart. The room shifted uncomfortably. Briggs made a decision. Starting tomorrow, we implement Sergeant Hayes' recommendations. All patrols randomized. No electronic communication in the field unless absolutely necessary. Old school fieldcraft. Captains, prepare your companies. Reeves looked like he wanted to argue, but Briggs' expression said the discussion was over. Dismissed. The officers filed out. Morgan lingered. When the room was empty, except for Jack, Briggs, and Morgan, she spoke. You're suggesting we abandon everything we've learned in 20 years of modern warfare. I'm suggesting you adapt, Jack replied. Modern warfare works great when both sides have the same technology. But when your enemy is using rocks and cell phones and outthinking you anyway? Maybe modern isn't better. Maybe it's just different. Morgan set her jaw. And you think going backwards is the answer. I think survival is the answer. Jack held her gaze. And right now, you're losing. Prove it, Morgan said. Jack raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Tomorrow. Training exercise. You against my company. If you're so confident in old-school tactics, show me. Jack glanced at Briggs. The colonel looked torn between concern and curiosity. Your call, Jack, Briggs said. Jack looked back at Morgan. Her eyes were challenging, angry, but beneath that, he saw something else. A need to understand, maybe even a need to connect, though she'd never admit it. All right, Jack said quietly. Tomorrow. But if I win, you listen to what I have to say. Really listen. And if you lose, Morgan asked, then I'll get on the next plane out and you'll never see me again. Morgan extended her hand. Deal. They shook. And for just a second, Jack felt the echo of who they used to be. Father and daughter, teacher and student. Then Morgan pulled her hand away and walked out. Briggs exhaled. You sure about this, Jack? Jack watched the door close behind his daughter. No, he admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. Because sometimes the only way forward was through the hard conversations you'd been avoiding for 10 years. And sometimes war forced those conversations whether you were ready or not. Outside, the mountain stood silent against a darkening sky. Snow was coming. Jack could feel it in the air. The same instinct that had kept him alive in Vietnam. The same instinct that told him something was wrong at Fort Glacier. Something beyond militia, beyond tactics, beyond anything Briggs had briefed him on. A storm was coming, and Jack had the sinking feeling that by the time it broke, nothing would ever be the same again. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, he had to figure out how to beat his daughter in a training exercise when he couldn't walk. His hands shook, and he hadn't held a rifle in combat for over 50 years. He returned to his quarters, opened the case he'd brought from Wyoming. Inside was the M40, scarred and weathered but maintained with religious devotion. Jack ran his fingers along the stock. The wood was smooth under his trembling hands. All right, old friend, he whispered. One more time. The weapon sat silent, but Jack felt its weight anyway. The weight of 87 confirmed kills, of 54 years of caring what he'd done, of a daughter who needed him even if she didn't know it yet. Tomorrow would tell if he had anything left to give, or if he was just an old man clinging to a war that was long over. Either way, he'd find out soon enough. The training exercise never happened. At 4:30 in the morning, 48 hours before the attack that would change everything, Jack Hayes woke in his quarters with the absolute certainty that something was wrong. Not the vague unease of a bad dream, not the phantom pains of old wounds. This was the same crystalline clarity he'd felt in the jungle 54 years ago when the air itself seemed to whisper warnings. He lay in the darkness, listening. The base was quiet, too quiet. No footsteps in the hallway, no distant voices from the night watch. Nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the faint whistle of wind against the window. Jack reached for the wheelchair beside his bed. His hands trembled as they always did now, but his mind was sharp, alert, processing information his conscious brain hadn't yet identified. Something was off. He moved to the window and looked out across the compound. Guard towers stood dark against the pre-dawn sky. Lights glowed in the command center. Everything appeared normal, but Jack had learned in Vietnam that normal was often a mask worn by death. He dressed quickly, pulling on thermal layers against the Montana cold, strapped his sidearm to his belt. The weight was familiar, comforting. Then he rolled himself out into the corridor. The base was a town of sleepers at this hour. Most soldiers were in their racks. The skeleton night crew manned essential posts. Jack moved through empty hallways, his wheels barely whispering against tile floors, toward the command center where he knew Briggs would be. The colonel never slept much, another gift from Vietnam. Jack found him in his office, hunched over maps and intelligence reports, a cup of coffee gone cold at his elbow. Briggs looked up when the wheelchair entered. Jack, what are you doing up? Couldn't sleep, Jack said. He approached the desk. What are you working on? Briggs rubbed his eyes. Trying to predict where they'll hit us next. We've lost 3 patrols in the last 6 months. Different locations. Different tactics. But there's a pattern. I know there is. I just can't see it. Jack studied the maps. Red pins marked attack sites. Blue pins showed patrol routes. Green pins indicated intelligence intercepts. And there it was, the pattern Briggs couldn't see because he was too close to it. Sam, Jack said quietly, these attacks, how far apart were they? Briggs checked his notes. First one was 6 months ago. Second was 4 months after that. Third was 2 months ago. Accelerating, Jack said. Briggs looked up sharply. What? Jack pointed at the map. They're not random raids, they're reconnaissance. Each attack was closer to the base. Each one tested a different aspect of your response. Communications, medical evacuation, quick reaction force. They've been studying you, Sam, building a picture. Briggs went very still. You're saying this has all been preparation? Jack nodded. For what? For something big. Something that requires them to know exactly how you'll respond. And if the pattern holds, it's coming soon. How soon? Jack met his eyes. Days, maybe hours. Briggs stood. His chair scraped against the floor. We need to increase alert status. Double the guard, lock down the perimeter. No, Jack said. What? If they're watching, and I think they are, then changing your posture tips them off that you know something. Better to act normal, but be ready. Briggs worked his jaw. He didn't like it, but he trusted Jack's instincts more than his own reluctance. What do you suggest? Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking through scenarios, running calculations formed over 54 years of staying alive. Let me do a perimeter walk, he said. Alone, if there's surveillance, I'll find it. Jack, you're in a wheelchair, which makes me look harmless. No one expects the old cripple to be the one checking for threats. That's an advantage. Briggs considered, then nodded slowly. Take a radio. Check in every 30 minutes. Will do. Jack turned his wheelchair toward the door. Briggs's voice stopped him. Jack, be careful. If you're right, and they are watching, you might not be as harmless looking as you think. Jack glanced back. In the dim light of the office, he looked less like a retiree and more like the Marine sniper who'd earned 87 confirmed kills. That's what I'm counting on, he said. Then he was gone, moving through corridors toward the cold Montana dawn. The perimeter of Fort Glacier was a 2-mile circuit. Fencing, guard towers, cleared fields of fire extending 300 yards in every direction. On paper, it was defensible. In practice, Jack saw a dozen vulnerabilities within the first 100 yards. The southeast corner had a blind spot where 2 buildings created a shadow the towers couldn't cover. The northwest gate's sightlines were compromised by a maintenance shed someone had built too close to the fence, and the entire northern approach, backing up to dense pine forest, relied too heavily on motion sensors that could be defeated by anyone who knew what they were doing. Jack noted each weakness, filing them away. But he was looking for something else, something specific. The kind of thing only someone who'd hunted and been hunted in hostile territory would recognize. He found it at the eastern guard tower. At first glance, it was nothing. A small scuff mark on the tower's support beam, about 3 feet off the ground. Paint scraped away, revealing bare metal underneath. Could have been caused by equipment, by maintenance crews, by anything. But it was fresh, and it was at exactly the right height for someone crouching while they worked. Jack rolled closer, reached out and ran his fingers along the beam, felt a seam where there shouldn't be one. He pulled and a small magnetic case came free in his hand. Inside was a listening device, military grade, powered by a battery that would last months, and it had been positioned to pick up radio traffic from the guard tower above. Jack's blood went cold. He pocketed the device and kept moving. Over the next hour, he found 2 more, one near the command center's ventilation system, one attached to the underside of a bench where officers gathered to smoke. Someone had been listening to Fort Glacier for weeks, maybe months. They knew everything. Jack returned to Briggs's office as the sun was beginning to paint the eastern sky pink and gold. He entered without knocking and placed the 3 listening devices on the colonel's desk. Briggs stared at them. Where? Perimeter. Communications points. High traffic areas. Jack's voice was flat. Sam, they have been inside your wire. They know your patrol schedules, your response times, your contingency plans, everything. Briggs picked up one of the devices, turning it over in his hands. How long? Based on battery life? At least 2 months, maybe 3. Jesus Christ. That's not the worst part, Jack said. Briggs looked up. If they planted these, they had to have inside help. Or they're good enough to infiltrate a secure military installation without being detected. Either way, you're compromised. Briggs set the device down carefully as if it might explode. I need to brief my commanders. Implement countermeasures. No, Briggs frowned. No? If you brief your commanders, word will spread. Your troops will change behavior. The enemy will know their surveillance is blown and they'll accelerate their timeline. Jack leaned forward. Sam, if they're planning something, our best chance is to let them think they still have the advantage. Let them commit, then hit them when they're exposed. That's a hell of a gamble. It's the only play we have. Briggs was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the base was beginning to wake. Boots on pavement. Voices calling morning reports. The ordinary sounds of a military installation that had no idea it was sitting in a trap. Finally, Briggs nodded. All right, we play it your way. But I'm moving non-essential personnel off base. Medical, support staff. If this goes sideways, I want minimal casualties. Good, Jack said. And I want Morgan's company on the high ground. North Ridge. Best firing position if they come from the forest. Briggs studied him. You think they're coming from the north? It's what I would do. Forest provides cover almost to the fence line. Motion sensors can be defeated, and your entire defensive posture is oriented south and east because that's where the road access is. You're thinking like them. No, Jack said quietly. I'm thinking like me. 54 years ago. Briggs understood. In Vietnam, Jack had been the hunter slipping through defenses, finding weaknesses, exploiting them. Now he was trying to think like his younger self to predict an enemy he'd never met. It was the only advantage they had. When do you think they'll come? Briggs asked. Tonight, Jack said. Or tomorrow night, no later. They've been patient, methodical, but patience has limits. And if they've been listening as long as I think, they know you're starting to change tactics because of me. They'll want to hit before you adapt. Briggs picked up his phone. I'll start the evacuation quietly. Medical emergency drills, gradual drawdown, nothing obvious. Good. Jack turned toward the door. And Sam, have Morgan report to my quarters. We need to talk. She's not going to like that, I know, Jack said. But she needs to be ready for what's coming, and she needs to hear it from me. After Jack left, Briggs sat alone in his office, staring at the listening devices on his desk. 22 years since Desert Storm, 15 years commanding troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, and somehow it took a man in a wheelchair to show him how blind he'd been. He picked up the phone and started making calls. Carefully, quietly, setting pieces in motion. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The day looked peaceful, normal. But Briggs knew now that normal was just a word for the calm before everything went to hell. Morgan knocked on Jack's door at 0700 hours. When he called for her to enter, she came in stiff and formal, keeping her distance. She hadn't forgiven him for showing up, hadn't forgiven him for the 10 years of silence, and she sure as hell wasn't going to make this easy. You wanted to see me, she said. Her tone could have frozen steel. Jack gestured to a chair. Sit. I'll stand. Morgan, please. Something in his voice made her pause. Not the authority of a superior officer, not the plea of a father, something else. Urgency, fear, maybe. She sat, but perched on the edge of the chair, ready to leave at any moment. Jack rolled closer. On the table between them, he'd laid out the 3 listening devices. Morgan stared at them. What are those? Surveillance equipment, Jack said. Military grade. I found them on the perimeter this morning. There are probably more. Morgan's professional demeanor snapped into place. She picked up one of the devices, examining it with the practiced eye of someone who'd done counter-surveillance training. How long have they been active? Months. She set the device down carefully. So they know everything. Everything, Jack confirmed. She processed this information quickly. Her mind was working through scenarios, calculating response times, running threat assessments. The colonel is evacuating non-essential personnel as we speak, but quietly. We can't let them know we're onto the surveillance. Morgan nodded slowly. You think they're coming tonight? It wasn't a question. Tonight or tomorrow, Jack said. And I think they're coming in force. This isn't a raid, it's an assault. How many? Jack was quiet. More than you have. Morgan met his eyes. How do you know? Because everything they've done has been preparation. The attacks, the surveillance, the patience. You don't go to that much trouble for a small operation. Jack paused. This is personal for someone, and personal means they'll commit everything. Who? I don't know yet, but we'll find out soon enough. Morgan stood, pacing to the window. Outside, soldiers moved through their morning routines. PT formations jogging past, vehicles heading out on patrol, everything normal, everything routine. Everything about to change. What do you need from me? She asked quietly. Jack joined her at the window. I need you to position your company on the North Ridge. Highest ground. Best sight lines. If they come from the forest like I think they will, you'll have first contact. My company is light infantry. We're not equipped for sustained defense. You won't be alone. Briggs is repositioning assets, but you'll be the tip of the spear. He looked at her. I need to know you can hold. Morgan's reflection in the window showed nothing. No fear, no doubt, just calculation. We'll hold. Good. They stood in silence for a moment. Father and daughter, soldier and soldier, the weight of what was coming pressing down on both of them. Dad, Morgan said quietly. The first time she'd called him that since he'd arrived. Jack's breath caught. Yeah? Why did you really come here? He could have lied, could have said it was duty, or that Briggs had convinced him, or that he needed to do one last mission before the Parkinson's made him completely useless. But he was done with lies. Because I was scared, he said. His voice was rough. When your mother died, I saw you pick up that rifle, and I saw myself. And I was terrified that you'd become me, that you'd carry what I carry, that you'd kill and kill and kill until there was nothing left inside but echoes. Morgan turned to face him. So you left. So I left. Because I thought distance would protect you from what I'd become. Jack's hands trembled on the wheelchair arms. But I was wrong. You didn't need protection from who I was. You needed someone to show you how to be better than I was. And now it's too late for a lot of things. But maybe not too late for this. He met her eyes. Tonight, when it starts, I need you to remember something. What? You're not me. You're better than I ever was. Because your mother taught you why to fight, and that makes all the difference. Morgan's eyes shone, but no tears fell. She nodded once. Sharp. Military. I need to brief my company. Go. She moved toward the door, stopped with her hand on the knob. Dad? Yeah? Don't die tonight. We've got 10 years to make up for, and I don't want to do it at your funeral. Then she was gone. Jack sat alone in his quarters looking out at the mountains. The sun was bright now, the sky clear. It was going to be a beautiful day, and then night would fall. The evacuation was handled with surgical precision. Medical staff recalled for emergency drills. Support personnel rotated out for scheduled leave. Supply trucks leaving early to beat a weather system that didn't exist. By noon, Fort Glacier's population had dropped from 285 to 112. All combat personnel, all volunteers, all ready. Morgan positioned her company on the North Ridge as ordered. 60 soldiers spread across a quarter-mile of high ground with clear sight lines into the forest below. They dug firing positions, staged ammunition, set up casualty collection points, and waited. Jack spent the afternoon doing his own preparation. He cleaned the M40 with the ritual precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Checked the scope, loaded magazines. His hands shook, but he worked through it. The rifle didn't care about Parkinson's. It only cared about the shooter's will. At 1600 hours, Briggs called a final briefing. Company commanders only. Morgan attended. So did Jack. The room was tense. Everyone knew something was coming. The sudden evacuation. The repositioning. The way officers spoke in clipped sentences and avoided eye contact. Briggs didn't sugarcoat it. Intelligence suggests imminent attack. Numbers unknown, tactics unknown. But they've been surveilling us for months and they're coming prepared. He looked around the room. Our advantage is that they don't know we found their bugs. They think they have surprise. But we're ready. His eyes found Jack. Sergeant Hayes has tactical command. You follow his guidance. A ripple of surprise went through the room. Briggs putting a Vietnam vet in charge was irregular at best. But no one argued. The colonel's expression said the decision was final. Jack moved forward. They'll come after dark, he said. Probably around 0200 hours when fatigue is highest. They'll use the forest for cover on the north approach. First wave will be probing, testing our response. Don't overcommit. Save your ammunition. Wait for my signal. What's the signal? Someone asked. You'll know it when you see it. That got a few nervous laughs. One more thing, Jack said. His voice dropped. Everyone in this room is here by choice. You could have left with the evacuation. You didn't. That makes you the kind of soldier that wins impossible fights. Trust your training, trust each other, and when it starts, don't think. Just fight. The room nodded as one. Dismissed, Briggs said. The officers filed out. Morgan lingered. When the room was empty, except for her, Jack, and Briggs, she spoke. You really think we can hold? Jack looked at her steadily. I think we don't have a choice. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the truth, and truth was all they had left. Night fell like a curtain dropping. Temperature plunged 20 degrees in an hour. Stars came out hard and bright and cold. The base went to blackout conditions. No lights, no noise, just soldiers in the dark, watching and waiting. Jack positioned himself on an observation platform near the north fence. Not as high as the ridge where Morgan's company waited, but high enough to see. The M40 lay across his lap. His radio was set to the command frequency. His breathing was slow and controlled. He'd done this before. 54 years ago, waiting in the dark for men who wanted to kill him, listening to the jungle breathe, feeling death approach like a change in air pressure. The Montana forest wasn't Vietnam, but war was war, and some things never changed. At 1:15 hours, the radios went dead. Not static, not jamming noise, just silence, complete and absolute. Jack keyed his radio, got nothing, tried again, still nothing. They'd killed the communications grid. Probably with a localized jammer positioned somewhere in the forest, which meant they were close, very close. Jack's heart rate didn't increase. His hand steadied. Adrenaline was a young man's drug. At this age, you didn't get adrenaline. You got clarity. He raised the M40 and scanned through the scope. Thermal imaging showed nothing but trees and rocks in the cold Montana night. No heat signatures, no movement, but they were there. He could feel them. At 0142, he saw it. Just a flicker, a shadow moving wrong, then another, then a dozen. They were coming through the forest in a staggered line, 50 yards apart, moving with discipline and coordination that militia groups didn't have. These were trained soldiers. Jack couldn't radio Morgan, couldn't warn Briggs. Communications were down and he was alone on the platform with a rifle and 87 memories whispering in his ear that he'd done this before and he could do it again. He aimed at the lead figure. Range 600 yards, wind negligible, target moving slow and steady. His finger touched the trigger and stopped, because if he fired now, he'd give away the position, alert them that Fort Glacier was ready. They'd scatter, regroup, hit somewhere else. No, better to wait. Let them commit. Let them think they had surprise. Let them get close enough that there was no retreat. Jack lowered the rifle and watched as 50 enemy soldiers moved like shadows through the forest toward the base perimeter. His base, his daughter's base. Closer, closer. At 200 yards, they stopped. Jack could see them clearly now through the thermal scope. Combat gear, body armor, assault rifles, professional equipment, professional tactics. This wasn't a militia raid. This was a military operation. And whoever was leading them knew exactly what they were doing. A hand signal rippled through the enemy line. They began to spread out, establishing firing positions, setting up heavy weapons, mortars from the look of it, and something else, something larger. Jack zoomed in, felt his stomach drop. A guided missile launcher, man-portable, probably a Javelin or something similar, aimed directly at the command center. If that fired, Briggs and his entire staff would be vaporized before they knew what hit them. Jack made a decision. He couldn't warn them with radio, but he could do something else. He aimed the M40 at the missile team. 2 operators, 1 spotter. They were being careful, professional, taking their time to set up the perfect shot. Jack didn't give them the chance. He fired. The sound cracked across the valley like a thunderclap. The lead operator dropped. His partner dove for cover. The spotter froze, confused, scanning for the shooter. Jack chambered another round and fired again. The spotter went down, and all hell broke loose. The enemy line erupted in response. Muzzle flashes lit up the forest like fireflies. Bullets tore through the air, shredding the platform around Jack. He dropped flat, rolling his wheelchair aside, using its bulk as minimal cover. But he'd done what he needed to do. Up on the North Ridge, Morgan's company had heard the shots. They'd seen the muzzle flashes. And now they opened up with everything they had. Machine guns, rifles. The coordinated fire of 60 soldiers who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. The forest erupted into chaos. Jack crawled to the edge of the platform and looked down. Enemy soldiers were scattering, trying to find cover, returning fire blindly into the dark. The element of surprise was gone. The ambush had become a firefight. And Fort Glacier, undermanned and outgunned, was fighting for its life. Jack keyed his radio, hoping the jammer was damaged in the chaos. "Morgan," he said, "if you can hear me, hold that ridge. Don't let them flank you." Static. Then Morgan's voice, broken and distant. "Copy. We're holding. Where are you?" "East platform." "I'm mobile." Jack was already moving, dragging himself along with his arms, leaving the wheelchair behind. He pulled the M40 with him, going hunting. Keep them pinned. "Dad, wait for backup." "No time." Then the radio died again. Jack was alone in the dark with a rifle and a base full of soldiers who were counting on him to be the man he'd been 54 years ago. The problem was, 54 years ago, he'd had working legs and steady hands, and the certainty that came from not knowing any better. Now he had experience, wisdom, and the absolute knowledge that he was probably going to die tonight. But that was fine. He'd died 100 times in Vietnam. What was one more? Jack hauled himself down from the platform using upper body strength alone. His legs dragged uselessly. His arms screamed in protest, but he kept moving. Reached the ground, started pulling himself toward the fence line where the enemy had breached. He could hear the firefight raging on the ridge. Morgan's company was holding, but barely. The enemy had numbers, and they were regrouping, bringing up heavier weapons. Jack needed to disrupt them, break their momentum, do what he'd done in Vietnam, become a shadow. He reached the fence and slipped through a gap torn by bolt cutters, into the forest, into enemy territory. The sounds of battle were different from down here, closer, more immediate. He could hear voices, Orders shouted in English with accents he couldn't place. Russian maybe, or Eastern European. Mercenaries, professional soldiers for hire. That confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't local militia. This was an organized force with funding and training, which meant someone with resources wanted Fort Glacier eliminated. Jack put the question aside. Focus on survival. Focus on the mission. He dragged himself behind a fallen log, set up the M40, scanned through the scope, found a target. Enemy squad leader directing fire, 600 yards. Jack breathed. The world narrowed. His hands steadied. He fired. The squad leader dropped. His men scattered. Jack chambered another round, found a second target. Machine gunner setting up to suppress the ridge. Fired. The machine gunner fell. The gun silent. Jack was moving again, dragging himself through undergrowth, ignoring the pain, ignoring everything except the next shot, the next target. 88, 89, 90. Each shot bought his daughter and her soldiers another minute, another chance. And if that was all he could give them, it would have to be enough. But then he heard something that made his blood freeze. A voice on a radio, close, too close. Phantom, I know you are out here. Jack went completely still. The voice continued, calm, almost amused. The accent was thick, Russian, but the English was perfect. 87 confirmed kills, 3rd Marine Division. Quezon, Hugh City, Tet Offensive, you were a legend. My instructors talked about you when I was learning the craft. Jack's mind raced. Who the hell was this? My name is Nikolai Volkov, Major, former Spetsnaz, and I've been waiting 54 years to meet you. Jack felt ice crawl down his spine. You killed my brother, February 1969, Quezon, Dmitry Volkov. He was a Soviet advisor, 17 years old. You shot him from 800 yards. The boy in the tree, the face Jack had carried for 54 years. I was 5 years old when they told me he was dead. 5 years old when I learned that the American sniper they called Phantom had killed my only brother, my hero, the man who was supposed to come home and teach me to be a soldier. Volkov's voice dropped, became intimate, dangerous. I spent my childhood learning to hunt, my adolescence learning to kill, my entire adult life hunting the man who did that, the Phantom. And when I learned you had a daughter stationed at this base, I knew it was finally time. Jack's hands tightened on the rifle. So here's what's going to happen, Sergeant Hayes. You're going to watch me kill everyone you care about, starting with Captain Morgan Hayes. And then, when you're broken and alone, I'm going to find you, and we're going to have a conversation about family, about loss, about the price of being a legend. The radio went silent. Jack lay in the darkness, his heart hammering, understanding washing over him like cold water. This wasn't about Fort Glacier. This wasn't about militia. This wasn't even about money. This was about revenge, personal, brutal, inevitable. And Volkov had been planning it not for months or years, but for 5 decades. Jack keyed his dead radio anyway, hoping against hope. Morgan, he whispered, if you can hear me, he's coming for you. The commander, his name is Volkov. He's Spetsnaz. He's good, and he wants you dead to get to me. Static. Jack tried again. Baby girl, run, please. Get off that ridge and run. Nothing. Jack closed his eyes. 54 years ago, he'd killed a boy and thought nothing of it. Just another target, just another memory to carry. But some memories don't stay buried. They grow, they fester, they come back with brothers who were 5 years old when the world taught them to hate. Jack opened his eyes. His hands had stopped shaking. His mind was clear. He knew what he had to do. He started dragging himself toward the North Ridge, toward Morgan, toward the man who'd been hunting him since 1969. And as he moved through the dark Montana forest, Jack Hayes made peace with the fact that he probably wasn't coming back from this. But that was fine. He'd lived on borrowed time for 54 years anyway. Tonight, the bill came due, and he'd pay it gladly if it meant his daughter survived. The firefight on the ridge intensified. Tracer rounds painted red lines across the night. Explosions bloomed like flowers. And somewhere in that chaos, Morgan was fighting for her life against an enemy who wanted her dead simply because she was Jack Hayes' daughter. Jack moved faster. Pain meant nothing. Exhaustion meant nothing. There was only the ridge, only Morgan, only the debt that needed paying. And in the forest behind him, Nikolai Volkov moved like a predator, hunting the legend who'd killed his brother, finally close enough to taste revenge after waiting since he was 5 years old. The longest night had only just begun. And before dawn came, Fort Glacier would learn the true cost of war. Not in tactics or strategy or casualty reports, but in fathers and daughters, in debts paid across generations, in memories that never stopped haunting. The past had come to Montana, and it had brought hell with it. The distance from Jack's position to the North Ridge was 800 yards. In Vietnam, when he'd been 20 years old with working legs and adrenaline flooding his system, he could have covered that distance in maybe 10 minutes through hostile terrain. Now, with useless legs and hands that shook even when he willed them still, every yard was a battle. He used his arms to drag himself forward, elbows digging into pine needles and frozen earth, the M40 rifle strapped across his back, his breath coming in white clouds that dissipated into the cold Montana night. Behind him, he left a trail through the undergrowth. Anyone tracking would find him easily. But Jack wasn't trying to hide anymore. He was trying to reach his daughter before Nikolai Volkov did. The firefight on the ridge sounded like the end of the world. Continuous crack of rifles, the deeper boom of grenades, tracers painting red and green lines across the darkness. Morgan's company was holding, but Jack could hear the intensity increasing. Volkov's forces were pressing hard, testing, probing, looking for weakness. And somewhere in that chaos, the man who'd hunted Jack since he was 5 years old was moving toward Morgan with murder in his heart. Jack pulled himself over a fallen log. Pain shot through his ribs. His arms burned. Every muscle screamed for rest. But he kept moving, because stopping meant Morgan died, and Jack had failed her enough for one lifetime. A voice crackled in his ear, his radio, damaged but not quite dead, picking up fragments of transmission. All units, fall back to secondary positions. We're being flanked. That was Morgan's voice, strained, professional. But Jack could hear the edge underneath, the beginning of desperation. He tried to respond, keyed the radio, got only static. Jack looked up at the ridge, maybe 400 yards now. He could see muzzle flashes, could see shadows moving against the firelight. So close, but it might as well have been 400 miles. Then he heard something that made him freeze. Footsteps. Close. Moving through the forest with the careful precision of someone who knew how to hunt. Jack rolled behind a tree, drew his sidearm with shaking hands, waited. A figure emerged from the darkness. Not American, Russian tactical gear, moving with fluid confidence. Scanning, searching. The figure stopped 10 feet from Jack's position. "I know you're here, Phantom," the man said. His accent was thick, Russian, but his English was perfect. "I can smell you, old man," scared, crawling through the dirt like an animal. Jack remained silent, motionless. The figure laughed. It was a cold sound, empty of humor. 54 years I've waited for this, 54 years of tracking, learning, preparing, all for this moment. He turned slowly, scanning the darkness. "My brother was 17 when you killed him. Did you know that? Did you even check?" Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. He was there as an advisor. Training, he wasn't even supposed to see combat. The mercenary's voice dropped. "But you didn't care, did you? You just saw a target, pulled the trigger, collected your count." Jack spoke then. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "I didn't know how old he was. Didn't know his name. Didn't know anything except he was aiming at my brothers." Jack shifted slightly, and I'd do it again. The mercenary spun toward the sound. His rifle came up, but Jack was already moving, rolling, firing. 3 shots, center mass. The man went down. Jack dragged himself forward, checked the body. Russian mercenary, professional, but not Volkov, just one of his soldiers. Which meant the real Volkov was still out there, still hunting. Jack pulled ammunition from the dead man's vest, reloaded, started moving again toward the ridge. Faster now, because if this soldier had found him, others would follow. And he was running out of time. On the North Ridge, Morgan was learning the difference between training and survival. Her company had been holding for 40 minutes. 60 soldiers against what had to be 200 attackers. They'd killed dozens, wounded more, but the enemy kept coming, wave after wave, professional, coordinated, willing to trade lives for position. Morgan moved between firing positions, checking ammunition, redistributing resources, calling orders, being a commander. But beneath the professional exterior, her mind was screaming, because she knew what was happening. This wasn't a raid. This was an elimination operation. Someone wanted Fort Glacier wiped from the map, wanted everyone dead, no survivors, no witnesses. And that someone had the resources to make it happen. Private Lucas Grant, the young soldier Jack had defended during training, appeared at her side. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, not his own. "Captain, we're down to 40% ammunition. Another 20 minutes and we're dry." Morgan nodded. She'd known this was coming. "Pull back to the secondary line. Fighting withdrawal. Keep them suppressed." Lucas hesitated. "Ma'am, if we pull back, they'll take the high ground. If we stay here, we die." Morgan met his eyes. "I'd rather lose ground than soldiers. Move." Lucas nodded and disappeared into the smoke. Morgan grabbed her rifle and moved to the western flank where the pressure was heaviest. Found Sergeant Rodriguez, an older soldier who'd served with Briggs in Desert Storm. "Talk to me, Sergeant." Rodriguez pointed into the darkness below. "Heavy weapons team setting up. Looks like a mortar. Range maybe 600 yards. Once they dial us in, we're done." Morgan raised her scope. Found the mortar team. 4 men, working efficiently, professional. She could take the shot, maybe hit one, but the others would scatter and she'd give away her position. Unless, Morgan keyed her radio. "Overwatch, this is Ridge Actual. I need fire on grid November 7-3. Mortar team, danger close." Static. Then a voice, not Briggs, not anyone she recognized. Older, rough. "Ridge Actual, Overwatch is offline, but I've got eyes on your mortar team." Morgan's breath caught. "Dad, I'm 300 yards below your position. I can take the shot, but I need you to suppress their perimeter. Give me 5 seconds of distraction. You're supposed to be at the command post." Plans change. Jack's voice was strained, tired, but steady. "You ready?" Morgan looked at Rodriguez. The sergeant nodded. "On your mark," Morgan said. 3, 2, 1, execute." Morgan and Rodriguez opened fire, spraying rounds into the forest around the mortar position. The enemy scattered. Returned fire. For 5 seconds, it was chaos. Then Jack's rifle spoke, once. The distinctive crack of the M40. The mortar team's ammunition crate detonated. Orange fire bloomed in the darkness. The blast wave rolled up the ridge. When the smoke cleared, the mortar position was gone. Morgan keyed her radio. "Good shot. Your mother taught me to shoot for the explosives." Jack paused, coughed. "Morgan, you need to pull your people off that ridge. This is a kill box. They're going to collapse it on you. We pull back, they take the base. Base doesn't matter if everyone's dead." Morgan looked around the ridge. Her soldiers, young faces, scared but holding, trusting her to get them through this. "I'm not leaving them, Dad." "I know." Jack's voice was soft. "That's why I'm coming to you." The radio went dead. Morgan stared into the darkness, trying to find her father. Disabled, dragging himself through a battlefield because she wouldn't retreat. And for the first time since he'd shown up at Fort Glacier, Morgan understood. He hadn't left because he didn't love her. He'd left because he loved her too much. Because watching her become a soldier meant watching her walk into the same hell that had broken him. But love didn't give you the right to run. It gave you the responsibility to stay. And now finally he was staying. Sergeant Rodriguez touched her shoulder. "Captain, east flank is collapsing. We've got wounded." Morgan pushed the thoughts aside. Focus, command, survive. Fall back to rally point Beta. Bring the wounded. We're consolidating position. As her company began the fighting withdrawal, Morgan scanned the forest below one more time, looking for her father, for any sign he was still alive. All she saw was darkness, fire, and shadows that might have been men or might have been death. The ridge was becoming a graveyard, and Morgan didn't know if she'd see morning. Jack reached the base of the ridge 30 minutes after killing the mortar team. His arms felt like dead weight. His chest burned with every breath. But he was here. Almost. The ridge rose 200 feet above him. Steep, rocky, impossible to climb for someone with working legs. For someone paralyzed from the waist down. Suicide. Jack looked up at the slope, heard the firefight raging above, heard his daughter's voice calling orders, heard the sound of soldiers dying, and he started to climb, not with his legs, with his arms, fingers finding cracks in stone, elbows hooking on roots, pulling, always pulling, inch by inch, foot by foot. The M40 caught on rocks, scraped his back raw. He kept moving. His hands bled, left red smears on gray stone. He kept moving. Bullets whined overhead, ricocheted off rock, sprayed him with stone chips. He kept moving. Because somewhere on top of this ridge, his daughter was fighting for her life. And even if Jack couldn't save her, he could die trying. That had to count for something. Halfway up, his left arm gave out. Muscle failure. Complete. He hung from his right arm alone, 200 pounds of dead weight suspended over a 100-foot drop. Jack looked down, saw rocks and darkness, saw an easy end to 54 years of carrying what he'd done. Then he looked up, saw firelight, heard Morgan's voice, sharp, clear, alive. And Jack found strength he didn't know he still had. He swung his left arm up, ignored the screaming muscles, hooked an outcrop, pulled, kept climbing. Took him 20 minutes to cover the last 100 feet, 20 minutes of agony, of defying every physical limitation, of refusing to quit because quitting meant abandoning Morgan. And Jack was done abandoning her. His head cleared the ridgeline. He dragged himself over the edge, lay gasping on cold stone, every nerve ending on fire, every muscle shaking. Then a voice, "Don't move." Jack froze, slowly turned his head. A man stood 10 feet away, late 50s, Russian tactical gear, holding a rifle aimed at Jack's head. And behind him, arranged like trophies, were 4 dead American soldiers. The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Sergeant Jack Hayes, the Phantom. Finally, he lowered the rifle slightly. "I'm disappointed. I expected someone more impressive. Not a crippled old man crawling in the dirt." Jack said nothing, conserving energy, calculating. The man stepped closer. "My name is Nikolai Volkov, Major, Spetsnaz. Though I suspect you've already guessed that." Jack's expression tightened. Volkov nodded. "Yes, I am the brother. The one who spent 54 years hunting the man who killed Dmitri." He crouched down, eye level with Jack. "Do you know what it's like to spend your entire life chasing someone? I was 5 years old when they told me my brother was dead. 5 years old when I learned the American sniper they called Phantom had shot him from 800 yards. He was my hero, the only family I had, and you took him." "You made your point," Jack said quietly. "You found me. This is between us. Let the soldiers go." Volkov laughed. "Let them go? No, Sergeant, you misunderstand. This isn't just about you. It's about legacy, about teaching the world that legends die like everyone else, bleeding, broken, watching everything they love burn." He stood, raised his rifle. "Your daughter is 300 yards that direction, fighting, losing. She'll be dead in an hour. And you're going to lie here and listen to her die. Then when you're completely broken, I'll kill you too." Slowly. Jack's hand moved. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady, drawing his sidearm. But Volkov was faster. His rifle barrel swung toward Jack's head. The shot never came, because another rifle spoke first. From the darkness, the distinctive crack of an M4. Volkov staggered, looked down at the red bloom spreading across his chest. His expression was surprise, confusion. He turned. Morgan stood 20 feet away, rifle raised, smoking barrel, eyes like ice. "That's my father," she said. Volkov smiled through blood. "Good. Now you can watch him die too." He raised his rifle toward Morgan. His movements were slow, labored, but determined. Jack didn't think, didn't calculate, just acted. He drew a sidearm and fired. 3 rounds, center mass, the same shots that had dropped the mercenary in the forest. Volkov went to his knees. The rifle slipped from his hands. He looked at Jack, still smiling. 88, he whispered. 89, 90. How many more, Phantom? How many before the nightmares stop? Then he fell. Jack and Morgan stared at each other across 20 feet in 10 years of silence. "Dad," Morgan said, her voice was shaking. "You climbed. How did you—" "Love makes you stupid," Jack said. He tried to sit up, failed, and apparently strong. Morgan ran to him, dropped beside him, her hands checking for wounds, finding dozens. Small, bleeding. Not immediately fatal, but he'd lost blood, a lot of it. "Medic!" Morgan shouted. "I need a medic now." "Morgan," Jack said quietly. "Don't talk. Save your strength." "Morgan, listen." She stopped, looked at him. Jack's hands were shaking again, but his eyes were clear. "I'm sorry for leaving, for the 10 years, for not being the father you deserved. You came back. That's enough." "No, it's not." Jack coughed, tasted copper. "But it's all I have. So I need you to know. Your mother would be so proud of who you've become, and so am I." "Dad, you're not dying. The medic is coming." "I know, but just in case." Jack smiled. It was tired but real. "You're the best thing I ever did. Better than 87 confirmed kills. Better than any medal. Better than surviving Vietnam. You're my legacy, and that's enough." Morgan's eyes filled, but no tears fell. "Don't you dare die on me. We have 10 years to make up for. Then I guess I better stick around." Footsteps. Voices, soldiers arriving, a medic pushing Morgan aside, checking vital signs, calling for a stretcher. Jack looked past them all, found Morgan's face. "Hold the ridge," he said. "The ridge is held. The attack is breaking. We won." Jack closed his eyes, let exhaustion take him. They'd won. His daughter was alive. And for the first time in 54 years, the weight he'd carried felt lighter. The battle ended 40 minutes later. Volkov's death had broken the enemy's coordination. Without their commander, the mercenaries scattered. Some tried to fight. Most ran. Fort Glacier's remaining forces hunted them through the forest until dawn painted the sky pink and gold. Casualties were heavy, 18 dead, 42 wounded, but they'd held. Outnumbered, outgunned. They'd held because of tactics written 54 years ago in a different war, but still true. And because an old man in a wheelchair had refused to let his daughter fight alone. Jack woke 3 days later in a hospital bed. His first thought was that heaven had surprisingly bland ceiling tiles. His second was that heaven probably didn't hurt this much. He tried to sit up. Couldn't. His body felt like it had been run over by a truck. Twice. A voice spoke from beside the bed. "Don't move. Doctor's orders." Jack turned his head. Morgan sat in a chair. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, uniform rumpled, but alive. "You stayed," Jack said. His voice was rough. "Someone had to make sure you didn't die and leave me with 10 years of unfinished conversations." "Fair." They sat in silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just present. "How bad?" Jack finally asked. "You?" 3 broken ribs. Severe muscle damage to both arms. Hypothermia. Blood loss. The doctors said anyone else would have died halfway up that ridge. "Guess I'm stubborn." "Guess you are." Morgan leaned forward. "Dad, what you did, climbing that ridge, taking on Volkov, that was stupid." "I was going to say heroic, but stupid works too." Jack smiled. It hurt. Everything hurt, but the pain felt earned. "What happened to Volkov's forces?" "Scattered. 43 captured. 15 killed. The rest are in the wind. FBI is taking over the investigation. Turns out Volkov had been planning this for years, not just the attack. The surveillance, recruiting, funding, all of it. Because of his brother." Morgan nodded. "Because you killed his brother. 54 years ago. He was 5 years old when it happened. Spent his entire life hunting you." Jack looked at the ceiling. "Some things never get buried," he said quietly. "No, they don't." Morgan paused. "Dad, the Army is putting you up for a medal, Silver Star, for actions under fire." "I don't want it." "Too bad. You earned it." She reached out and took his hand. Her grip was strong, steady. "And Colonel Briggs wants to offer you a permanent position. Training. Tactics. Teaching soldiers how to think like you." Jack's expression shifted. "Briggs, how is he?" Morgan's face fell. "Dad, Colonel Briggs didn't make it." Jack went very still. "What?" "He was in the command center when a mortar round came through. Direct hit. He died instantly, him and 3 staff officers." Jack closed his eyes, felt something crack inside. Sam Briggs, Desert Storm veteran, good commander, better friend, the man who'd called him when no one else would. "Gone." "When's the funeral?" Jack asked quietly. 3 days, full military honors. "I want to be there." "Dad, you can barely move." "I don't care. Sam trusted me when no one else would. I owe him that much." Morgan nodded slowly. "All right, I'll make it happen." 3 days later, Jack sat in his wheelchair at Arlington National Cemetery. The sky was gray. Cold wind cut through the rows of white headstones. The honor guard stood at attention, rifles gleaming. Jack wore his dress blues, the silver star pinned to his chest. Morgan stood beside him in her own dress uniform, now with the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel on her shoulders. The chaplain spoke words Jack didn't really hear. Something about duty and honor and sacrifice. The same words spoken at 10,000 military funerals. True but insufficient. The honor guard raised their rifles. 3 volleys cracked across the cemetery. Birds scattered from nearby trees. Taps played. The mournful notes carrying across stones that marked warriors from every American war. Vietnam, Korea, World War II, all the way back to the Revolution. Now Sam Briggs joined them. The flag that had draped his coffin was folded with precise ceremony, presented to his widow. She accepted it with shaking hands. When it was over, when the mourners began to disperse, Jack remained, staring at the fresh grave, at the headstone that would be placed later. Colonel Samuel Briggs, 1965 to 2023, husband, father, soldier. Morgan touched his shoulder. "We should go, Dad." Give me a minute. She stepped back. Let him have his moment. Jack looked at the grave and spoke quietly. You were right, Sam, about bringing me in, about giving me a chance, about trusting me to do what needed doing. His voice was rough. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry you had to die, proving I wasn't a mistake. The wind blew. Dry leaves skittered across stone. But I promise you this, Jack continued. I'll do what you wanted. I'll teach these soldiers. I'll make sure what you built doesn't fall apart. And I'll make sure your death meant something. He saluted, sharp, military, holding it for 5 seconds. Then he lowered his hand and let Morgan wheel him away. Behind them, the grave stood silent, but Jack felt lighter somehow. Like a debt had been acknowledged, even if it could never be fully repaid. The living owed the dead. That was the price of survival, and Jack Hayes intended to pay it. Morgan got her promotion 2 weeks later. Lieutenant Colonel, in command of a new unit, specialized tactics. They were calling it the Unconventional Warfare Division. Her first order of business was hiring staff. Jack accepted the position of senior tactical advisor. His office was small, a desk, a bookshelf, and on the wall the M40 rifle mounted in a glass case with a brass plaque. Sergeant Jack Hayes, the Phantom, 87 confirmed kills, Fort Glacier, 2020. Below it, a second plaque, smaller, quieter. Colonel Samuel Briggs, 1965-2023. He trusted when others doubted. Jack sat at his desk on his first official day and looked at a file Morgan had left for him. A new recruit, name Private Lucas Grant, age 19. Psych eval flagged him as unconventional thinker, difficulty with standard command structure, recommended for specialized training. Jack smiled. He knew exactly what to do with Lucas Grant. The same thing Sam Briggs had done with him. Give him a chance. Wyoming cabin, December 2024. The story ended the way it began. In a cabin in Wyoming with snow falling outside and a fire crackling in the hearth. Jack sat in his wheelchair, the M40 rifle across his lap. Tommy sat across from him, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. So, Tommy said slowly, you didn't die. Jack smiled. Disappointed? No, I just thought, the way you were telling it, it sounded like you died saving Aunt Morgan. Almost did, but almost is a word that means you get to keep living. Jack ran his hand along the rifle stock. Took me 3 months to recover, 6 months of physical therapy. But here I am. And Aunt Morgan got her promotion. Runs one of the best tactical units in the Army. Teaches soldiers who don't fit the regular mold how to use their differences as strengths. Tommy leaned forward. And you help her? When she needs it. Mostly I just tell old war stories and pretend I'm still useful. That's not what Aunt Morgan says. Jack raised an eyebrow. What does she say? Tommy grinned. She says you're the best tactical advisor in the Army, and that anyone who underestimates the old man in the wheelchair does it at their own risk. Jack laughed. It was a good sound, free, unburdened. Your aunt is biased. Maybe, but she's also right. The fire popped. Snow continued to fall. Outside, the world was quiet and cold and at peace. Tommy was quiet for a moment then. Grandpa, do you still see them? The people you killed? Jack considered the question. Honest answers for honest questions. That was the deal. Sometimes. Not as much as I used to. Volkov's there. Your grandmother. All the soldiers who didn't make it home. Colonel Briggs. He looked at his grandson. But they don't haunt me the way they used to. You can carry the past differently. As reminders. As lessons. As reasons to be better. Is that what you do? I try. Some days are easier than others. Jack shifted in his wheelchair. But having people who love you helps. Your aunt, you, your parents. You make the weight lighter. Tommy nodded slowly, processing. Can I ask one more question? Always. Do you regret it? Becoming a sniper, killing all those people. Jack was quiet for a long time. The fire burned, the snow fell, and finally he answered. I regret the necessity of it. I regret that the world is broken enough that young men have to become killers to protect what they love. But do I regret doing it? He met Tommy's eyes. No, because every life I took was to save others. Every shot was a calculation. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. Save who we can, protect who we love, and hope it's enough. It sounds like it was enough. Jack smiled. Ask me again when I'm 80 and we'll see. The door opened. Morgan entered, bringing cold air and snowflakes and the scent of pine. She'd driven up from the base for the weekend, stood in the doorway looking at her father and her nephew. Telling war stories again, Dad? Just the good ones. All your stories are good, Morgan crossed to the fire, warmed her hands. Tommy, your mom's on the phone, says dinner's ready. Tommy stood reluctantly. Can I come back tomorrow? I want to hear more stories. Anytime, Jack said. I've got more than enough. Tommy grinned and ran out. His footsteps thundered down the hallway. A door slammed, then quiet. Morgan sat in the chair Tommy had vacated. You told him about Volkov. He asked. What did you tell him? The truth. That some things catch up to you eventually. But if you're lucky, they find you when you're ready to face them. Morgan nodded, stared into the fire. I got the final casualty report today. Fort Glacier. And? 18 dead, 42 wounded, against 200 plus attackers. She looked at Jack. The analysts say we should have been wiped out. No way we hold that position with those numbers. But we did. You did. I just helped. Dad, you crawled through a battlefield, climbed a cliff, killed Volkov, all with paralyzed legs and Parkinson's. Morgan's voice was fierce. Don't diminish that. Don't diminish you. Jack met her eyes. I learned from the best commander I know. A woman who held a ridge with 60 soldiers against impossible odds. A woman who refused to leave anyone behind. A woman who makes her mother proud every single day. Morgan's eyes shone, but no tears fell. Hayes women didn't cry. They adapted. They fought. They survived. I got you something, Morgan said. She pulled a small box from her pocket, set it on the table between them. Jack opened it. Inside was a medal, silver star, for gallantry in action. They wanted to give it to you at a ceremony, but I told them you'd hate that, so I brought it here. Jack picked up the medal. It was heavy, cold, just a piece of metal and ribbon, but what it represented was everything. Acknowledgement, validation, proof that he'd done something that mattered. He set it back in this box and closed the lid. Thank you. You earned it. We earned it, you and me, together. Morgan smiled. Yeah, we did. They sat in comfortable silence. Father and daughter, soldier and soldier, connected by blood and battle and 10 years of rebuilding what had been broken. Finally, Morgan spoke. Dad, I'm putting together a new training program, teaching disabled veterans how to transition from active duty, how to find purpose after service, how to not feel useless just because their bodies changed. Sounds important? It is, and I need an instructor, someone who's lived it, someone who can show them that disability isn't the end. It's just different. Jack looked at her. You want me to teach? I want you to inspire. The way you inspired me. The way you inspired that battalion. Morgan leaned forward. You've got experience no one else has. Use it. Help people. Make what you carry mean something. Jack was quiet, processing. Then, all right, I'll do it, but on one condition. Name it. You have dinner here once a week. No work talk. No war talk. Just family. Morgan's smile was bright enough to light the whole cabin. Deal. They shook hands. Formal, military. Then Morgan pulled him into a hug, careful of his injuries, fierce in its intensity. I love you, Dad. Jack held his daughter and felt 54 years of weight finally start to fade. I love you too, baby girl. Outside, the snow continued to fall. The mountains stood silent and eternal, and in a small cabin in Wyoming, a father and daughter who'd spent 10 years apart and one night saving each other, finally found the peace that had eluded them both. Not the peace of silence, the peace of presence. Not the peace of forgetting, the peace of carrying memory without being crushed by it. Not the peace of the end, the peace of new beginnings. Jack moved to the window, looked out at the white landscape, saw Tommy building a snowman with his parents, saw Morgan joining them, laughing, alive. He picked up the M40 rifle, felt its familiar weight, remembered every shot it had taken, every life it had ended, every soldier it had saved. 87 confirmed kills in Vietnam, 3 more at Fort Glacier, 90 total. But also 12 men saved at Khe Sanh, a battalion saved in Montana, a daughter given a second chance at having a father, a grandson given stories that taught him what service meant. That was the real count, not the deaths, the lives. And Jack Hayes decided that maybe, just maybe, he'd done enough. The weight would always be there. That was the price of being a soldier. But it didn't have to be the only thing he carried. He could carry Tommy's laughter, Morgan's pride, the memory of Linda's love, the weight of medals earned and battles won, Sam Briggs' trust, Lucas Grant's second chance. He could carry legacy, and that was more than enough. Jack had set the rifle back in its case, locked it, placed it on the shelf next to his silver star and his daughter's Ranger tab and a photo of Linda smiling in the sunshine. Then he returned to the fire, picked up a book, settled in to wait for his family to come back inside. The war was over. The weight was lighter. And for the first time in 54 years, Sergeant Jack Hayes, Marine sniper, father, grandfather, legend, was home. Really home. And that was the best ending of all. The end. The story of Jack Hayes and Morgan Hayes. The sniper they tried to discharge. The daughter who refused to quit. The father who climbed a mountain to save her. The weight finally lifted. A story about war and family and redemption in the long road home. A story about how legends are made not in the moment of glory, but in the quiet choices to stay when leaving would be easier. To fight when surrender would be simpler. To love when fear would be safer. Jack Hayes earned 87 confirmed kills in Vietnam, but his greatest victory was climbing a ridge in Montana to save his daughter. And that's the shot that mattered most. Breathe like your life depends on it, because sometimes it does, and sometimes so does someone else's. That's what makes you a hero. Not the killing, the saving, always the saving.